Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Dee Dee Laugesen, Executive Secretary for the Committee on the Present Danger, China. We appreciate your interest in our weekly webinars in which we expose and analyze the Chinese Communist Party's unrestricted warfare against America and the help being provided to the CCP in waging that warfare by captured U.S. elites. We encourage you to visit presentdangerchina.org for information on new programs, access to videos of our past webinars, and tons of other very valuable content. Please subscribe to our Substack at presentdangerchina.substack.com and follow us on X at CPD China. Today's webinar is a joint sponsored webinar with the Committee on the Present Danger China and Save the Persecuted Christians. All of these assets will be at savethepersecutedchristians.org as well, and our campaign website, revealthedeal.org, revealthedeal.org, or repealthedeal.org. Both work. Our moderator today is Frank Gaffney. Frank is the president of the Institute for the American Future, vice chair for the Committee on the Present Danger China, and president of Save the Persecuted Christians.
Thank you, Dee Dee. And welcome, everyone, to this special joint webinar presentation of both the Committee on the Present Danger China, part of our weekly webinar series, which we urge everyone to take aboard at presentdangerchina.org, as well as a webinar in a series that are conducted by our Save the Persecuted Christians coalition as well. It brings these wonderful teams together with others, freedom fighters, I call them, who are all concerned about what has happened under the papacy of Pope Francis with respect to a deal that was initially agreed in 2018 and now has been re-upped 3 times, including just a month or so ago, for a 4-year period. We're going to present in the course of today's program reasons why everyone, not just Roman Catholics, certainly not just the leadership of the Catholic Church, but everyone should be profoundly concerned, if not actually upset, by what has been done, either under the terms of this secret deal, which remain undisclosed, but are broadly understood, to involve, for example, the decisions about who will be the leadership of the Church, the Roman Catholic Church in China. But also what has happened as a result of this deal, not just to Roman Catholics, but also other Christians, indeed people of other faiths inside China today. These are the sorts of issues that we believe must be front and center in the leadership conversations that are taking place now, in advance of the formal conclave that will take place on the 7th of May, at which point a new pope will be elected. But now, in advance of that very, very important decision, the church hierarchy must take stock of what has been done, and we hope will take 2 steps to reveal at long last the contents of this agreement, and secondly, to repeal it formally. We're going to hear about both the content, the substance of these topics, as well as more about the campaign that the Committee on the Present Danger China's members of our Save the Persecuted Christians coalition, and I say other distinguished figures, some of whom are with us today, we're very pleased to say, are going to be mounting intensively for the next 7 days to inform and we hope engage the Catholic Church leadership to take action in these 2 regards. And as has been mentioned by my colleague Didi Logison, from whom we'll be hearing more shortly, Repeal the Deal.org is a place where you can not only learn more about all of this, but also take action. So with that, let me welcome our first presenter. Her name is Elizabeth Yore. She has been at the very forefront, really, of the challenging issues that have been roiling the Catholic Church for, well, many years under this papacy. She has been incredibly effective, I think, in advocating on behalf of, well, both traditional Catholics, of which she is a prominent one, but also on behalf of believers of all stripes, to assure that the Church and its leaders are advancing the vital interests of followers of Jesus Christ, not party to efforts to subvert them, suppress them, in fact, to crush them, which is very much the agenda of Chinese dictator Xi Jinping. Liz is the founder and president of Your Children, which is continuing advocacy and activism she's engaged in throughout her professional career, much of it in government in her state of Illinois and at the federal level, now being conducted in the private sector. We're very, very pleased to have her with us to sort of provide the context about what's in the deal and how we got here. Liz Yore, the floor is yours.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you to the audience, and a welcome to my fellow warriors on the panel. On April 21st, the 12-year reign of Jorge Bergoglio, Pope Francis, ended with his death. And as Catholics, we are living right now through a momentous time in the Church as our new leader will be chosen. And according to canon law, the cardinals of the Church will gather to elect a new pope as the successor to Peter. And May 7th, as Frank pointed out, a conclave will be held where 135 cardinals under the age of 80 will gather in the Sistine Chapel to choose a new pope. And 108 of those cardinal electors, nearly 80%, have been appointed by Pope Francis. But at this very moment, all the cardinals of the Catholic Church are gathering in Rome, including our beloved 93-year-old Hong Kong Cardinal Joseph Zen, for preliminary discussions in what are called the General Congregation meetings to discuss the state of the Church and the profile of the man who will assume the chair of Peter, the sovereign head of the Holy See in Vatican City. And reports from Rome, and this is breaking news, are that Cardinal Zen is really in full throttle attack mode at Secretary of State Parolin, the architect of the secret and what many of us believe catastrophic China-Vatican deal. Arguably, through the course of the last 12 years, Pope Francis has promulgated radical ideas, contentious innovations, and in his papal edicts have been highly controversial, but most controversial, and in fact, I believe most destructive action in this papacy is the secret deal signed with the Chinese Communist Party on September 22nd, 2018. This covert deal initiated, negotiated, executed, and renewed 3 times by Pope Francis has really ushered in a whirlwind of persecution, not only to faithful Catholics of the underground church, but to all faith believers in China. Interestingly and curiously, the specifics of the deal are unknown, except that it involves the appointment of Catholic bishops in China. I believe that the deal was kept secret because the Vatican knew that the terms of the deal would send Catholics into full-throated fury, because the Vatican will, as we now know, sold out the faith to the communists, and Francis would be exposed as a communist sympathizer. The CCP knows how to exploit secrecy for its own benefit. And so here we are, the Vatican playing tiddlywinks while the CCP plays 3D chess. Here's a short history of the deal. The state of the Catholic Church in China is divided between the Patriotic Catholic Church, which was created in 1957 by Mao Zedong as an extension of the Communist Party, a church which apes the Catholic Church and is in many ways diametrically opposed to the faithful underground church, which remains loyal to Rome. Pope Pius XII, in his encyclical on communism and the church in China, stated about the Patriotic Church, "For under an appearance of the Patriotic Catholic Association, which is just a fraud, it aims at making Catholics gradually embrace the tenets of atheistic materialism by which God himself is denied." Well, 12 million Catholics are divided between the communist state-controlled Chinese Patriotic Catholic Association and the underground Catholic Church, which is faithful to the Vatican. And instead of supporting the underground church by his mighty word and deed, the Francis Vatican deceived them by this secret agreement and drove them further underground and unleashed further persecution on many faiths in China. Curiously, and very few people know about this, there were reports that said that Pope Francis's first call after his election in March of 2013 was to the Chinese President Xi Jinping. And shortly thereafter, Pope Francis dispatched his personal envoy, the notorious serial sexual predator, Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, to China. But before sending McCarrick to China, Francis was personally told by Archbishop Carlo Vigano that McCarrick was a known sexual predator that the previous Pope Benedict had sanctioned and barred from public ministry. Nevertheless, Francis sent McCarrick to China, not once, but at least 3 times. And according to McCarrick, the purpose of the trip was to restart talks with the Chinese government on the appointment of bishops. McCarrick enjoyed a long history with the Patriotic Church and Jorge Bergoglio, stating that, if you can believe these words, Pope Francis and President Xi Jinping could be a special gift for the world. And years before, though, Pope Benedict terminated negotiations with the Chinese on this issue because, according to U.S. diplomatic cables, Benedict could not trust the Chinese to keep their end of the agreement. Now, the highly respected, revered, retired Cardinal Joseph Zen of Hong Kong repeatedly urged the Vatican not to enter into agreement with the CCP. The elderly Zen traveled to Rome to personally plead with Pope Francis that the CCP were not to be trusted and would surely violate the agreement. Francis ignored and dismissed this wise man from Hong Kong. And so on September 22nd, 2018, the Vatican signed the secret deal with the CCP on the appointment of bishops. And the Holy See issued a very cryptic 73-word statement, a press communique regarding the agreement. And it stated, "It concerns the nomination of bishops, a question of great importance in the life of the church, and creates the conditions for greater collaboration at the bilateral level. The shared hope is that this agreement may favor a fruitful and forward-looking progress of institutional dialogue and may positively contribute to the life of the Catholic Church in China." Well, shockingly, the opposite occurred, and it occurred immediately. We now know that one of the terms in the secret agreement was that 8 previously excommunicated bishops who had been appointed by the communist-run Patriotic Church were now recognized and fully restored by the Holy See. Moreover, 2 underground bishops who were previously recognized by the Holy See were ordered to step down from their diocese. And curiously, Pope Francis conceded that as a result of this agreement, Chinese Catholics will suffer. There is always suffering in an agreement. Obviously hasn't read The Art of the Deal, but suffering is in fact what has occurred. And Pope Francis was painfully correct, because the persecution began to steamroll Chinese Catholics as a direct result of this agreement. Xi's CCP swiftly deployed the secret agreement as a cudgel against Catholics and Christians to force them to submit to the Communist Party anti-religion directives. On display for the world to see was the further disintegration of Catholicism in China, with shockingly the complicity of the Vatican. The net effect of this secret agreement resulted in a huge uptick of demonstrable violence, widespread destruction, and religious persecution against Catholics and Christians by the Xi government, the Vatican's trusted bilateral partner. And Cardinal Zen spared no words and called the secret deal a suicide pact with the devil, a shameless surrender, a perverse deception, a betrayal, a sellout to deliver the church into the hands of the enemy. However, Pope Francis assured the faithful that he, not Beijing, will be the ultimate authority over naming new bishops. Within a few months, the terms of the agreement were already being violated by China, as Zen had predicted, and contrary to Francis's promises, the CCP, not the Vatican, exercised undue influence over the naming of the bishops. The ink was barely dry on the secret pact when international religious freedom NGOs began to report an immediate uptick in religious persecution and harassment at the CCP directly related to the secret Vatican Pact. For example, the condemnation of the Vatican-China deal was widespread, with Human Rights Watch condemning it, saying, Pope Francis's silence is particularly troubling as Beijing intensified repression on religious freedom. China Aid stated, this reported deal is nothing short of a betrayal of both the millions of suffering persecuted Christians in China and the global Catholic Church. The U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom stated, the Vatican now bears a significant moral and legal responsibility to help solve the problem which it created. The Vatican has made a terrible mistake, which it must take seriously. This debacle must be dealt with urgently and seriously. Shockingly, the documented demolition of Christian churches, symbols of worship, the detention, harassment, arrest, and imprisonment of bishops and priests and Catholic laity has dramatically escalated since September 22nd, 2018. The CCP cracked down on the underground church priests, making many of them sign or forcing them to sign a clergy ID, saying that they would agree to support the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association. And many of them refused. And as a result, they were not allowed to practice their ministry. Many religious activities sites were shut down. A new government policy restricted all religious activities to approved religious sites only. Clergies couldn't offer prayers, anoint the sick at parishioners' homes, or attend funeral services. Incredibly, in the midst of this ongoing persecution, the Vatican renewed the secret pact in 2020, in 2022, and again in 2024, this time for 4 years. All during this time when 10 bishops, Catholic bishops, have been arrested and disappeared by the CCP for refusing to sign a loyalty oath to the Patriotic Church. And the crackdown on religious freedom in Hong Kong, the arrest and imprisonment of Jimmy Lai and other Catholics and religious freedom advocates, and most tragically, the brutal enforcement of the CCP law, which bans all children under the age of 18 from participating in any religious services, any religious schools, even religious summer camps. Xi Jinping is now enforcing his avowed goal. We must solemnly reject religion. we must not believe in religion. And he is doing so with the collaboration of the Holy See. Religious symbols have been, such as crucifixes, have been removed from churches and replaced with the photographs of Xi Jinping. Bibles are being rewritten to reflect communist tenets. And this has all been hastened by the vile, secret, covert, brutal deal initiated by Francis and Predator Ted McCarrick, and celebrated and supported by Cardinal Pietro Parolin, the leading contender for Pope in the upcoming conclave, along with other contenders such as Cardinal Tagle of the Philippines and Cardinal Stephen Chow, all of whom will enter the Sistine Chapel on May 7th to elect a new Pope. You know, during the Mao Zedong Reign of Terror, Shanghai Bishop James Walsh stated, "Nobody has any illusion about the communist determination to eliminate all religion." The lingering question is, why did the Francis Vatican ignore that obvious reality? The wreckage of this perilous pact lies squarely at the feet of Pope Francis and his Secretary of State, Pietro Parolin. This monstrous pact must be repealed, and all the terms must be revealed forthwith. And there must be a resounding rejection of the unconscionable China deal by the conclave. Each one of the 136 cardinal electors should demand that the next Pope disclose the terms and offer a full, heartfelt apology to the people of China. Well, they wear the red hat, these cardinals. And part of wearing the red hat is that you must be faithful, steadfast to the faith, and even shedding your blood for the faith. May these words awaken the consciences of the cardinals in the 2025 conclave, for they too wear the red hat, the red of the martyrs. They too are called to be faithful. Now is the time that they must be brave, stand up for our beloved faithful in China, and demand that this diabolical pact with the devil be revealed and repealed. Pray for the suffering China church, who we love desperately.
Thank you, Liz Yore. What an extraordinarily comprehensive and powerful introduction to the challenge facing us at the moment. We're going to turn next to Benedict Rogers. He is under some time pressure, so we're very pleased that he was able to join us at all. He has been a driving force behind efforts in Hong Kong, notably Hong Kong Watch, to try to preserve freedom there. He is the co-founder and deputy chair of the Conservative Party's Human Rights Commission, and a very active contributor to the public policy debate about all of these matters. And we're honored to have him with us to talk about the secret deal's devastating impact on the Chinese faithful, notably, and in particular, the outrageous persecution of Jimmy Lai, a devout Catholic, and countless others, whether they be Catholics or Christians, who are similarly being persecuted. Benedict, welcome back. It's good to have you, sir. Over to you.
Well, thank you so much. It's a great privilege to join you. I'm, as you can tell from my accent, I'm from the United Kingdom, but I actually happen to be in the United States at this moment. And I want to start by saying I agree with everything that you all stand for, that Elizabeth Yore in particular has set out. And the phrases reveal the deal and repeal the deal are two phrases I 100% support. I want to just start on a personal note by saying that I am a 12-year-old Catholic. I may not look it, but I was received into the Catholic Church 12 years ago, actually 11 days after the election of Pope Francis, in the country of Myanmar by Myanmar's Cardinal Charles Bo, who is one of the cardinals who has spoken out, not specifically against the deal so much, but spoken out very strongly on China in general. But I want to say that I didn't come into the church 12 years ago to seek an argument with the Vatican or certainly not with the Pope, but that is where I have found myself over the last few years. I've written widely on this subject, And I think the biggest concern I have about this deal, the two biggest concerns are firstly that it is still secret, and that's why I strongly support the objective of this campaign to reveal the contents of the deal. But secondly, that it appears to have bought the silence of Pope Francis throughout his pontificate. This was a pope who spoke out regularly on issues of injustice and persecution and conflict around the world. But the one country, the one corner of the world that was conspicuous by its absence was China. He never once spoke about the genocide of the Uyghurs, about the, well, he mentioned it once in passing, but he never spoke out strongly on the genocide of the Uyghurs, the persecution of Falun Gong, the issue of forced organ harvesting, and certainly the persecution of Christians. But I'll start, as I've been asked to, with the particular case of Jimmy Lai, because it is, to me, outrageous that throughout recent years, Pope Francis never once said anything about Jimmy Lai. Jimmy Lai will be known to many of you, but for those who don't know about him, he is one of the most prominent Catholics from Hong Kong. He became a Catholic some years ago. He was a hugely successful entrepreneur, media proprietor, and pro-democracy campaigner. And Jimmy Lai could have left Hong Kong at any moment. He had properties around the world, but he decided to stay in Hong Kong and support the cause of democracy in his city. And as a consequence, Jimmy, who I know personally and have met many times, has been in solitary confinement in prison for the last nearly 4.5 years since his imprisonment in December 2020. He's been jailed on multiple charges, including many months for lighting a candle at a vigil to commemorate the Tiananmen Square massacre, for taking part in a peaceful protest. But he's currently on trial under the draconian national security law in Hong Kong. That trial has lasted over 18 months already and still has not concluded. So they're really deliberately dragging it out. And it's highly likely that he will receive either a life sentence or a sentence so long that it will be the equivalent of a life sentence, because he's 77 years old. He's not in good health now, and he could very well die in jail. Most significantly, as a Catholic, he has, for the last 2 years or so, been refused the right to receive the sacrament of Holy Communion in prison. He was able to receive it in the early part of his time in jail, but in the last couple of years, he has been refused that right. And yet the Vatican has said nothing about that. They have said nothing about him. And there have been multiple requests from his son, Sebastian Lai, who's been an outspoken campaigner for his father, for Sebastian to have an audience with Pope Francis, and those requests never received a response. Elizabeth Yore has already talked about the wider effect of the agreement on Christians across China, and I just want to reinforce what she has said. It is shocking to me that as a result of this deal, underground Catholic bishops who were loyal to Rome, who'd spent many years in prison, faced severe persecution, were asked, not by Beijing, but by the Vatican, to step down in favor of Beijing-appointed bishops as a consequence of this deal. I assume, trying to regard Pope Francis charitably, that his intentions behind the deal were to see an improvement in religious freedom and an improvement in the lives for the Catholic Church in China. But the reality is the result of this deal has been the exact opposite. It has resulted in further persecution and intensification of persecution. The 10, at least 10 bishops have already been mentioned, but let me just name some of them. Bishop Augustine Cui Tai, Bishop Joseph Zhang Weizhu, Bishop Vincent Guo Shijin, and Bishop Peter Shao Jumin. and others have all at various times over recent years, and indeed multiple times, been arrested, disappeared, held in secret detention. These are all outlined in an excellent paper by the Hudson Institute. And these are just 10 cases. I think there are many others we should also be concerned about. There is, for example, the case of Bishop James Su Jimin, who has been disappeared, held in secret detention. Indeed, we don't even know if he's still alive. He's been disappeared for the last 27 years. And on top of that, there have been multiple violations of the agreement. At least two bishops, Bishop John Peng Wei Jai as auxiliary bishop in Jiangxi, and Bishop Joseph Shen Bin in Shanghai, were appointed by Beijing without consultation or without the approval of the Vatican. In the second case, the Pope gave his approval subsequently, but these were two clear breaches of the agreement. Although the agreement is secret and we don't know the details of it, we do know that it gives Beijing a role in the appointment of bishops. And we also know that it does require Beijing to consult and seek the approval of the Pope. And in at least two cases, those requirements were breached. We also see more broadly the extension of surveillance around churches, the requirement for churches to display portraits of Xi Jinping and Chinese Communist Party propaganda banners, and has already been mentioned the prohibition of people under the age of 18 from going to places of worship. So I want to conclude with some specific recommendations. I have set these out just in an article published yesterday in Foreign Policy magazine, and I think perhaps the link could be made available to viewers. I've also written other recent articles since the death of Pope Francis on the same theme. But my recommendations, I think, are entirely in line with those of this campaign. And they are, firstly, publish the deal, reveal the deal. Secondly, at least, I mean, in an ideal world, I support the campaign to repeal the deal. But if the Vatican and the next Pope isn't willing to go that far in one step, then at the very least, review the deal and set conditions for its renewal. It's next up for renewal in 2028. And I believe that at a minimum, the Vatican should set a requirement for the release of all imprisoned bishops and priests, and a demand for the release of Jimmy Lai as preconditions for the renewal of that deal. And thirdly, the next Pope should end the silence of the papacy, of the Vatican, on human rights. The next Pope should speak out with clarity on the persecution of Christians, but also the genocide of Uyghurs, the atrocities in Tibet, forced organ harvesting and the persecution of Falun Gong, and the dismantling of freedom in Hong Kong. The next Pope, in my view, should re-engage with His Holiness the Dalai Lama, the spiritual leader of Tibet. Pope Francis was the only Pope in recent decades to decline to engage with the Dalai Lama. All previous popes, apart from John Paul I, whose papacy was very short, all recent previous popes have met with the Dalai Lama many times. The next Pope should also strengthen the Vatican's relationship with Taiwan. It's significant that the Vatican is still one of the few states in the world that has diplomatic relations with Taiwan, not with Beijing. And yet the previous Pope, Pope Francis, never publicly, to my knowledge, prayed for Taiwan, for the protection of Taiwan's vibrant democracy, for peace in the Taiwan Strait. The next Pope should do so. And I want to conclude finally by noting that in 2020, the courageous, distinguished Cardinal of Hong Kong, His Eminence Cardinal Joseph Zen, who's already been rightly mentioned and who I've had the privilege of meeting a number of times, made the bold attempt to visit Rome in the midst of the COVID-19 pandemic as an elderly man saying that it may well be his last visit to Rome. And he requested an audience with Pope Francis, and that audience was declined. And it seems to me extraordinary that a pope, even just on a pastoral level, would refuse to give an audience to one of his most senior, most respected, most elderly cardinals from Asia. Now, Pope Francis did subsequently meet Cardinal Zen on the sidelines of the funeral of Pope Benedict, but nevertheless, that refusal of an audience in 2020 was yet another indication of all of the mistakes that the last papacy made on China. And I hope the next pope will listen to Cardinal Zen, will meet with him regularly, will take his advice as the most distinguished, indeed the only Chinese cardinal in the church today, the cardinal who knows most about China. His voice should carry weight. And I hope that the College of Cardinals in the conclave next week will do the right thing and choose as Pope someone who is committed to reveal the deal, to repeal the deal, and to end the Vatican silence on human rights. Thank you very much for having me.
Benedict, thank you, especially for doing so on short notice and with a crushing schedule. We really appreciate your comments as well as your elevation in particular of the plight of Jimmy Lai and others like him. I did want to call attention, you mentioned the Hudson Institute report. It is a very powerful 50-page indictment, really, of this deal. And its author, Nina Shea, wanted to be with us today, but was unable to do so due to scheduling concerns. We will have her as a very important part of this campaign going forward, though, to be sure. I did also want to just mention that we are praying for the peace of Taiwan, for sure. And it's very much appreciated that you've mentioned the importance of the Pope addressing this subject, unhindered by the kinds of considerations that have obviously operated under the papacy of Francis. We're going to hear next from our friend and colleague. You heard from her, as we do in each of these webinars, as our introducer. Her name is Didi Logison. That is just one of the many hats she wears. She is also the executive secretary of our Committee on the Present Danger China and the executive director of Save the Persecuted Christians, a woman of profound faith, Roman Catholic, and very, very much engaged on trying to stop the persecution of Christians around the world. And she comes to this topic of the CCP's sinicizing of the Catholic Church pursuant to this deal, and how it must be countered with great conviction and extraordinary energy. And we're always delighted to hear from her. Didi Logison, over to you.
Thank you, Frank. The Vatican has been deceived by the truly diabolical Communist Party of China and their paramount leader, Xi Jinping, an archetype of the Antichrist. Indeed, Xi Jinping lusts after earthly power of His Holiness, the Pope, and the worship owed to God alone. The Vatican is entertaining this megalomaniac for what? For political prestige here on earth? What benefits are gained with this deal? Xi has no problem breaking international agreements. We've seen this with Hong Kong and so many others. And to take power to create new dioceses or appoint bishops and otherwise meddle in essential church affairs. And the Vatican is appeasing them. According to the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedoms fact sheet on sinicization, China's ethnic policy classifies citizens into 55 distinct ethnic minority groups, each with its own cultural autonomy within its territory. But since 2016, the Communist Party under Xi Jinping's rule has imposed a new approach, one that favors integration and assimilation, the process dubbed, as you've heard, as sinicization in official speeches and documents. And this is something that goes back to the Mao Zedong times, when religious adherents were murdered and shamed in public. When documenting religious demographics within the country, it's difficult to prove what the demographics of China are but various sources have estimated that the number of religious adherents spans from roughly 350 million, the population of the United States, to over 850 million of the country's 1.4 billion population. In 2021, the US government estimated that 18% of the population are Buddhist, including Tibetan Buddhists, 5% are Christian, 2% Muslim, and other significant traditions include Taoism, Falun Gong, and folk religious practices. Sinicization is the political indoctrination process that embeds the CCP and its political ideology into every aspect of religious life in China, from the religious beliefs themselves to the physical structure of places of worship. The process of sinicization entrenches the CCP's control and its vision for the modern Chinese state into every aspect of religious life by forcing groups from the 5 officially recognized religions to conform their beliefs, activities, expression, attire, leadership, language, houses of worship, and more to CCP ideology. The government creates policies and regulatory measures to sinicize religion and authorizes state-controlled religious organizations to oversee their implementation, as Liz Jor was explaining. Sinicization and its so-called patriotic values, including Chinese socialism, national unity, and support for the CCP and its leadership, are the foundation of every major government regulation for religious organizations, including the measures on the administration of religious groups, measures on the management of religious clergy, and measures for the administration of venues for religious activity. Even legislation not exclusively regulating religious affairs like the Patriotic Education Law explicitly stipulate patriotism for religious groups, a euphemism for political allegiance to the CCP. Enforcement of such sinicization policies has consistently resulted in systematic, ongoing, and egregious violations of religious freedom and related human rights abuses, including genocide, crimes against humanity, mass incarceration, enforced disappearances, and the destruction of cultural and religious heritage. In targeting Catholics, the government has ordered the removal of crosses from churches, replaced images of Jesus Christ or the Virgin Mary with pictures of President Xi, required the display of CCP slogans at the entrances of churches, censored religious texts, imposed CCP-approved religious materials, and instructed the clergy to preach CCP ideology. The CCP is even rewriting scripture to take out the word Lord and Jesus from scripture, rewriting the 10 commandments. It's and minors under 18, including nursing infants, are forbidden from entering places of worship or participating in religious instruction. This truly is a slow-rolling genocide of all faiths in China. Tens of millions of Christians have opted not to join these organizations offered by the CCP. Underground Catholics do not recognize the spiritual authority of the government-backed religious clergy, as we've heard, and instead view the Vatican as the sole legitimator of spiritual authority, and the Vatican has betrayed them. While the Vatican and China signed an undisclosed agreement in 2018 to cooperate on the appointment of bishops, the CCP-aligned bishops, as we've heard, have been appointed without consultation or approval by the Vatican. The Vatican's silent, tacit approval of increased persecution and the adulteration of the Catholic faith in China has emboldened the CCP in its brutal treatment of other minority groups. The Vatican is appeasing the CCP, one of the world's worst human rights violators. There's no better time than now, in the days leading up to the conclave beginning on May 7th, to make our voices heard, whether or not you're Catholic, by joining the efforts to reveal the deal, repeal the deal. And we're calling it the RTD2 campaign for short. You can see everything we've got put together at revealthedeal.org, revealthedeal.org, also repealthedeal.org. Either one of those URLs will get you to the website where you can take action today American citizens are encouraged to take action with our Align Act campaign there that will let you communicate with President Trump and your elected members in Congress, encouraging them to make statements about this secret deal, and even host hearings to investigate the harms caused to the Chinese people because of this deal. And everyone, Americans and foreigners, are encouraged to sign our petition at change.org. That is also available at repealthedeal.org. Finally, we have a social media toolkit for you in which my colleague Oleg Bashin has created an incredible array of memes to be shared. And we have a number of sample social media posts there that can be copied and reposted. Just take it and run with it. We can all do this together. It's going to take everybody, Catholics, Christians, believers in other faiths, to come together to help the Vatican come out of this diabolical deception and see clearly with the eyes of faith the harm that has truly been done by the secret deal. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Dee. I just want to most especially thank you for all that you've done, along with Oleg Bashin, to make these elements of the action aspects of this campaign possible. We want to make sure people are not confusing RTD2 with R2D2, but like the Star Wars character, there is a certain irresistible force quality, we hope, to this campaign that will be inspiring and engaging of Americans, yes, but people around the world as well. And the resources to take action are all there at repealthedeal.org. We're going to hear next from a man who brings a different perspective than our Catholic presenters. His name is Jan Jekielek. He is a senior editor with a wonderful publication, I personally believe the best newspaper in the country, as well as the host of one of the best interview programs in the country, and that would be, of course, American Thought Leaders. Jan has long worked with and been a practitioner of Falun Gong. He understands what we're talking about in terms of the brutal persecution of faith communities by the Chinese Communist Party. He's been, I think, extraordinarily effective in trying to make it clear that what is being done in terms of forced organ harvesting and incarceration and torture and rape and other brutal repression of people because they practice Falun Gong is just symptomatic of what is wrong with this Chinese Communist Party and what it wishes to do to all of us. And we asked him to address the secret Vatican deal's devastating impact on other faith communities in China, not just Catholics or even Christians as well. Jan, thank you so much for joining us. The floor is yours, sir.
Frank, thank you so very much. That's a wonderful opening. I've been listening with kind of shock and horror in a way to the previous speakers. You know, I'm familiar with this Vatican CCP Pact. Of course, none of us know the details because it is indeed secret. I hadn't fully grasped how negative it has been for the Catholic Church itself. Which is, I mean, it's just kind of an astonishing thing because it keeps getting, started in 2018 and then ever since it's been basically renewed, and I'm still kind of scratching my head as to why. Of course, the idea I kind of understand the idea. Let's assume the best faith here, right? From the Vatican, every religious group in China is persecuted in atrocious ways. Any group that doesn't explicitly put itself directly under the Chinese Communist Party's control. As one of the previous speakers mentioned, the CCP's purpose is to remove, the reality of religion, right? The CCP is uninterested in people exploring their connection with the divine. It seeks to replace that connection. It seeks to be the guide, the spiritual guide, so to speak, for every person, even though it wouldn't describe it that way. So, I think Cardinal Zen had it right when he, his intent was, of course, to tell the Pope that the CCP was not to be trusted because he saw what was happening on Hong Kong. I had the honor of interviewing him actually in Hong Kong, just before the national security law came down, and we discussed exactly these sorts of things. Who better to listen to than someone who actually has to face the CCP on behalf of the Catholic faithful? It's amazing to hear how badly it's gone for the Catholics, because it's been, since this deal has been signed, pretty much universally. I kind of double checked to make sure, but since I follow these issues so closely, I think every group has the religious freedom, and certainly religious persecution has increased and religious freedom has gone down, whether we're talking about Catholics, Protestants, Falun Gong practitioners, Tibetans, Uyghurs. This whole genocidal, I would call it accelerated, genocidal process against the Uyghurs, basically started since that time. Just simply, of course, correlation isn't necessarily causation, but that's the actual reality of what's happened to essentially every other faith group that seeks to be independent of the regime. And the CCP, it's, I think, universally regarded as the greatest violator of religious freedom in the world, in all a myriad of ways. And that's really saying something, considering the contenders for this distinction, right? I don't know too many people, credible people, that would actually kind of deny that at this point. I think the thing you have to understand, and this is something that I think is the most difficult thing to kind of explain to audiences, because in the West, in free societies, we always try to assume good faith first, right? And what 40, 50, however many years of working with the CCP, trying to make deals with the CCP, trying to do bilateral human rights dialogues with the CCP teaches us, and is that you have to assume bad faith. You have to assume bad faith. And again, I think this is the sort of thing that Cardinal Zen was hoping to express to the pontiff. The CCP, there's one, aside from power, okay, there's one thing that it craves the most, and that is legitimacy. Okay, it craves legitimacy. It doesn't have that legitimacy. It violently oppresses its people. It drives its economy on the backs of at least half of them. We could go on and on this. We have, you can see what it did with its World Trade Organization access. It got the legitimacy that it was going to be a free trader. And what did it do? It never, followed the rules even once, and basically used the rules to attack anyone who would try to prevent it from basically doing whatever it wanted to. And here we are today in this current situation. So you can kind of see the impact of what legitimizing the CCP does. And I think this is what happens here. With the Vatican signing this deal, in effect, right, it basically puts a kind of seal of approval. And there's all sorts of people out there that don't really understand the nuances, are too horrified to face the realities. And they go, well, the Vatican has signed a deal. Maybe a lot of Catholics even. Obviously, there must be, they must believe there must be some good faith here. There must be some progress. There must be some movement forward. But everything, the previous speakers to me have been saying is kind of the opposite, right? But from the perspective of just people out there, the Vatican will use this deal, right, as a way to as part of its United Front Work Department work to propagandize overseas communities and say, look, actually, no, we're legitimate. We work with the Vatican. There's no issue there. And so this, you can imagine what an incredibly pernicious effect it has. And I think to some extent, right, and again, we would have to look exactly at how much the Vatican has been speaking about human rights in China since 2018. But my guess is not a lot. So the effect of it is it buys a kind of silence, and whether that's intended or not, I'm not saying that that's the Vatican's intention, but in pursuit of this deal, ill-fated deal, one of the most powerful potential voices for religious freedom, right? Because of course, the Vatican would seek to have people have the opportunity to become Catholics in China, right? But that opportunity, even as we've heard earlier, is not even, children aren't even able to participate in any religious services, right? Never mind Catholic ones, for example. How are people going to, how are young people going to ever, get to know about Catholicism, given this kind of reality, even while such a deal is passed? So I would say that the impact is overtly, to summarize, overtly, by correlation, not causation, been a huge decline, massive increase in religious persecution, huge decline in religious freedom in China since the time of the deal. And one would hope that the Vatican could, in the future, take a stronger position for religious freedom, and that would be for the benefit of, I think, every faith group in China.
Thank you so much, Jan. What a beautifully presented indictment, really, of especially this idea of legitimizing the Chinese Communist Party in its repression of religious freedom. We're going to hear next from a man who has made it his life's work to study, analyze, and explain to the rest of us what totalitarians like the Chinese Communist Party are intent on doing to freedom-loving people. He hails originally from New Zealand. He saw it at work there many years ago and has been warning of it since he migrated to the United States, thankfully. Notably from those within such countries who work with, who aid and abet, and otherwise serve the purposes of the Chinese Communist Party and similar allied totalitarian systems of other ideological stripes. He is the author and filmmaker of The Enemies Within, also a marvelous film, The Enemies Within the Church. He is most recently the author of Comrade Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese's 40-year alliance with Australian communism. And we've asked Trevor to drill down on this so-called patriotic Catholic Church and whether it's really little more than a weapon of the Chinese Communist Party's United Front Work Department, and what that means, yes, for Catholics in China, but also the rest of us as well. Trevor Loudon, welcome back to the program. Glad to have you. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Frank. Well, the Catholic Church faces a momentous decision that is going to affect not just 1.4 billion Catholics, but the entire free world. We've gone in 60 years from Pope Pius XII, his decree against communism of 1949, which explicitly called for the excommunication of all Catholics who were in any way involved with atheistic communism. This was in the after, when communism was showing its hand in Eastern Europe, was suppressing people. Communism was taking hold in China. Pope Pius explicitly called for the excommunication of anybody cooperating with these regimes. We know the great work that Pope John Paul IV did with Reagan and Thatcher in calling for the dissolution of the Soviet Communist Empire. The Catholic Church has always been a bulwark of anti-communism. It's always been in its DNA. How could the center of the Christian world be having any truck with communism at all. Well, we know that very shortly after coming to, becoming the Pope, Francis initiated the Transversal Dialogue Project, otherwise known as Dialogue, which was explicitly about Christian Marxist dialogue. Now, he involved in that was Michael Brie, the son of Horst Brie, one of the leaders of the East German Communist Party shortly before the fall. Michael Brie and his brother were both known Stasi informants who have now risen to prominence in European and German politics, while still maintaining their full communist allegiances. And Michael Lowy, a very, very prominent Trotskyist, a part of the Fourth International. Excuse me. So these are the kind of people that Pope Francis was having truck with. And Francis has been able to appoint, I think, roughly 80% of the current College of Cardinals who will choose the next Pope. Now, getting back to China, the fact that the Patriotic Church in China is part of the United Front work department, people need to understand what the United Front is. That is an explicit part of the Chinese Communist Party that is used to spread Chinese Communist Party influence into non-communist populations, countries, ethnic groups, etc. The United Front, the work department, works with Chinese friendship associations all over the world. It works with American business organizations, Western business organizations, third world political parties, often non-communist political parties, but anybody who can be brought by money or ideology or business deals, whatever it takes, into the Chinese Communist Party's orbit. So the fact that the Catholic Church has entered into an agreement with the Chinese Communist Party, effectively upgrading the false patriotic church, the Communist Party church, making it really the de facto representative of Catholicism in China, means that the Chinese Catholics are not just being led out of the orbit of the Vatican, they're being actually used by the CCP as an organ of the CCP to increase, to give respectability to a fake church that can then be used to send delegates to international religious conferences, to represent the Chinese Communist Party at United Nations conferences, human rights conferences around the world, and push the Chinese Communist Party line while officially being regarded as Catholic, as deceiving people into thinking this is a real representative of the Vatican, whereas completely a representative of the CCP. Now, right now, there are no Chinese cardinals, but the fact that the Chinese Communist Party is really choosing who will be the next bishops and is basically persecuting the underground Catholic Church and moving every Chinese Catholic as far as it can into the orbit of their controlled Chinese Patriotic Catholic Church, means that there will come a time where there will be Chinese cardinals chosen by the CCP. Will Chinese Communist Party cardinals be electing the next pope? Will they be on the world stage, condemning, defending the Chinese line against Taiwan, which is a way more Catholic than the People's Republic of China, or against Korea, or against Tibet, or will it become increasingly a tool of Chinese foreign policy? 1.4 million Catholics around the world is a massive power block. And that's how the CCP looks at it. They don't look at this as a group of religious believers, people trying to connect to the divine. They look at it as a power block that can be manipulated to advance the cause of the CCP. And the fact that the Vatican, under the left-wing Pope Francis, or a Pope who's been willing to accommodate the hard left, has basically sold 12 million Chinese Catholics into the grip of the CCP is beyond shocking. You know, and any bishop, any cardinal who refuses to recognize this fact and to stand up for what is right in the coming vote and repudiate this deal, make sure it's a condition of anybody assuming the papacy that this deal will be fully exposed, will be apologized for publicly on the world stage, and will obviously be terminated. All cardinals must have this question put to them, because to allow this to continue, it's at the very least a sin of omission. And I'm not qualified in any way to debate cardinals on issues of theology, but I understand the principle of sin of omission. And if people are required not just to not do bad things, but to stand up for what is right. And here is the time to stand up and give the Catholics of China real leadership, and not just of China, but all around the world, because I think we all understand there is a deep crisis in the Catholic Church right now. There's a lot of division between the more liberal elements and the traditionalist and conservative elements. And this breach is not going to be healed if the Catholic Church continues to accommodate the Chinese Communist Party. In fact, it's only going to be widened, and it's going to be used as a stick to beat the Catholic Church with into the future. This is a time for the Catholic Church to apologize for an egregious mistake, to rectify that mistake, and actually stand up for the Catholics of China and around the world who understand that communism is evil, and that the Catholic Church should have no truck at all with evil, regardless, should stand up for what is right here. So thank you very much.
Chairman Loudon, as always, what an exceptional dissection, really, of the phenomenon we're talking about here. And you bring especially to the implications, really, of ignoring what's going on, as opposed to wrestling with it. And we will talk more about that in a moment in Q&A. But before we do, we're going to hear from the chairman of our committee on the present danger of China, Brian Kennedy, a man whose devotion as a Catholic, I think, informs his thinking about all of these issues, of course, but whose role as a very prominent public intellectual and national security professional in our country today also gives him a very important clarity as well about the nature of the threat we face from the Chinese Communist Party, and anything that we do that might not only embolden Xi Jinping, but make his ambitions to dominate the world more, shall we say, probable of success, must be eschewed, of course. Brian Kennedy is these days, in addition to being our chairman, the president of the American Strategy Group. Prior to that, he served for many years as the president of the highly esteemed Claremont Institute. He is the author of numerous books on the Chinese threat, among other things, and we are delighted to have him sort of close these presentations with sort of summation of the need for us to reveal and repeal the deal. Say us, I mean the royal us, the Chinese Communist Party's partner in all of this, the Roman Catholic leadership. And why it is a necessary corrective for the church, yes, but also a fitness test for the next pope. Brian Kennedy, welcome back. Over to you.
Thank you, Frank and Didi, as well, for organizing all of this. I think it's one of our most important subject matters to date. Even if you are not Catholic, this should be of great concern for you, because I think it symbolizes the trend in the world and where we're going. And I think what Trevor had to say about communist China seeing the Catholic Church as a source of power is quite right at one level, and I may differ with him on other levels, but I certainly agree with everything he said about communism and the fact that the Catholic Church, and for that matter, no human being should have any truck with communism and its all of its evils. Frank usually has me give a sort of a final blessing to many of these webinars, and so let me do it with this one as well. Let me thank Liz Yore for an outstanding presentation, and I couldn't agree more with what she had to say about the whole state of the church. I will say, and this is where I was going to disagree with Trevor just a bit. I'm an American Catholic. I'm an American. I believe in the Catholic Church. I'm baptized a Roman Catholic. But I think I, like many Americans, don't take any marching orders from Rome. Far from it. The great worry about Catholics in America was always that they would somehow be taking guidance from the Pope or from a cardinal or from a bishop. And I think in the long history of the country, Catholics have been, especially today, pretty solid, pretty conservative Americans, especially in American politics. Not perfect by any stretch, but adhering more to a belief in American common sense, the natural right, natural law, traditions of the church, which happen to be also the traditions of the United States. And so when we think about the power of the Catholic Church as a bloc, it's certainly there potentially, but I think the crisis that has been talked about here today really underscores the weakness of the Catholic Church as a bloc, such that when the Pope says something today, I think many of the faithful around the world, and certainly anybody who's not a Catholic, kind of just shrugs it off, because the moral legitimacy of the Catholic Church has been broken for a half century. And when you elect a new pope, you typically have an opportunity to set certain things right that have been wrong. Pope Francis came to power, was elected pope, and he had an opportunity to get to the bottom of and expose and potentially correct in powerful ways the sexual abuse scandal within the church by the clergy. And he didn't do that. He did a pretty poor job of any part of it, and elevated in many cases, such as Cardinal Theodore McCarrick elevated him, or at least accommodated him within the church, sending a signal throughout the church that even if you were among the worst offenders, you could be part of the church. That is the exact wrong thing to do if you are a pope or a cardinal or a bishop. And the fact that that occurred underscored the lack of moral legitimacy that the church had. So that is something that everyone should be considering here when a new pope is elected, because we don't want to be sending signals to people who abuse children that it is acceptable to do so in any way, shape, or form. These are vile criminal acts that need to be punished. And Pope Francis and his organization of the church certainly did not act that way. And that is a shameful stain on his legacy. Then we have this China deal. Well, I think we know, we're asking in these efforts here to reveal what the China deal is. I think we know what the China deal is. In so many ways, we see it operationally. No children shall be educated. So no one under the age of 18 will be educated in the Catholic faith. Okay, that must be explicitly in the deal if we see it operational every day. Rome will be subservient, meaning the authority of the Vatican will be subservient to Beijing when it comes to matters of faith and morals. That must be obviously in the deal because that is operationally what's going on. If you violate that, you could be disappeared. Witness 15 Catholic bishops in China who have been disappeared. Why is this not a human rights scandal? Well, maybe it's not a human rights scandal because the killing of, 1 million or 2 Uyghurs is not a scandal. So maybe 15 Catholic bishops is not a scandal. But this is something the world needs to wake up to because it exposes what the Chinese Communist Party is all about. It's about control. Back to the deal. The deal excludes certain religious observances, such as a crucifix in a church, which has been replaced by a photo or a picture of Xi Jinping. And so Xi Jinping is a deity, or is meant to be a deity, for the Chinese Catholic Church, or Patriotic Association, whatever they want to call it. Well, this is a despicable thing. And the idea that Pope Francis would have allowed that to occur is again, a very shameful thing on his past. I will say that Pope Francis was an agent of globalism throughout his entire tenure. And the danger of having a pope who believes in globalism is that they are going to gravitate toward the Chinese Communist Party and the ambitions of the Chinese Communist Party when it comes to their global project to make communist China into the world's dominant power. Now, as I say, I think the moral authority of the Vatican has in so many ways all but evaporated. That faithful Catholics believe in the faith because they believe in the faith. They believe Jesus is their Lord and Savior. And when they go to church every Sunday, they have a local priest and pastor that they can talk to directly. And if they agree or disagree with him, they can let it be known directly to him. And so the church survives throughout the world because you have the faithful primarily as the dominant driving force of authority within the church, because the authority coming from on high among the church elites, just as we see among global elites everywhere, their moral legitimacy is fraudulent and gone. And so when we look out on the world today, there is a beacon of hope for the Catholic Church. I don't believe it resides in Rome. It resides in the hearts and minds of the Catholic faithful around the world who themselves have been diligent, most especially in America, for believing in not only the faith, but in the freedom that is required to defend that faith. And it is my sincere hope, Frank, that in what we have to do with this project, that not only are we exposing the dangers of the Chinese Communist Party, but we're elevating the most important part of the church. And the most important part of the church are the Catholic faithful. And the defenders of the faithful reside substantially here in the United States because it is we who believe in human freedom. And if freedom is going to be defended anywhere in the world, including for those members of the church, it will really emanate from what is being discussed here in this country, and hopefully have influence on what transpires, both in the current conclave, but in the operations of the church throughout the world for many years to come. So thank you, and I look forward to for our discussion on this, Frank.
Right. Thank you, as always. An excellent summation, as well as some guidance going forward. very much appreciate you being with us. We're over time a bit, but I do want to just do a quick lightning round of questions to each of the remaining participants. I think Liz Yore may have been pulled into another platform where she is holding forth, I hope, at the moment with Steve Bannon. Let me just, Dee, if I could, a question to you arising from Trevor's remarks. It's my understanding that there actually is right now in the Cardinals conclave coming up a Chinese Communist Party appointed cleric. Is that the case?
There's one communist appointed bishop who has been elevated by the Vatican, by Pope Francis, to be a cardinal, and that is Stephen Chow. He came to the United States even just recently and gave the Boston College class of 2024 commemoration speech. So he's definitely active. So there are 3 Catholic cardinals that we know support the deal. That's Pietro Parolin, who's been the Vatican Secretary of State for a very long time, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle, which we've talked about on the show earlier, and Stephen Chow, who is the Hong Kong Bishop Cardinal.
So they have made clear their support for this. As far as we know, others who will be in the conclave, 132 others, I guess, maybe not just yet, but they should. And I think this is a point that Trevor made very powerfully. We'll come back to that in a moment. Jan, to you, you made a very powerful presentation about the impact on non-Catholics in China. And just to draw you out a little bit further on this, the Uyghurs have been mentioned, of course, the Falun Gong, Tibetans of Buddhist tradition are among those that have basically gone unmentioned in these various commentaries and prayers and other efforts of the Pope under Francis previously. I'm speaking of Pope Francis, to hold up human rights. I mean, we've heard endlessly about what Israel is doing, for example. We've heard a lot about the Trump administration, the first incarnation and the latter one, and human rights in other parts of the world. When this silence is so profound, even on things like genocide of Uyghurs or the forced organ harvesting of it, it must be unbelievably demoralizing to those who are in those faith communities. Christians, of course, among them, Catholics for that matter. And I just would ask you to, could you put a little bit more texture on that as a matter of the priority that should be assigned to corrective action here? Because it's so egregious what's being not done, the sin of omission, as Trevor called it.
The impact of essentially turning a blind eye to the most, I don't like to use the word genocide too often because that's a very abused word, right? But let's call it, the most extreme violations of human rights that you can do, trying to eliminate a whole group of people, or this organ harvesting, which David Maid has called an evil yet to be seen on this planet. You turn a blind eye to that. And especially to people that are trying to, expose these violations and so forth. Well, you end up in a situation where the CCP even goes after these people in places like the United States and Canada and so forth. So the term we use in the human rights community, or certainly when I was there, transnational repression is what it's called. But the effect, like right now, there's all sorts of examples. That we have a very prominent Hong Konger that has $1 million bounty on her head to return her to Hong Kong. We have this elevation of the persecution of the Shenyun dance group, which showcases, what China could look like in a situation where there isn't religious persecution, or how that important that relationship with the divine was historically. Extra emphasis on trying to basically destroy that group. And frankly, even with the Epoch Times, because we've been very effective at exposing, what the regime has been up to, which in a way the Chinese regime views as an extension of Falun Gong's efforts, because we were founded by Falun Gong, also elevated. We have all sorts of Uyghur activists being targeted. And so what I think the most immediate corrective action, right, is to try to, first of all, challenge that transnational repression whenever it happens, whichever faith group it happens to be with, or even with people who are democracy activists and so forth. We haven't done a terribly good job with this. It's been getting better. I know this is a high priority for the FBI and the DOJ now. So I hope it would be great to see that being done, but also as prominently as possible. I think this is the key element. Okay. As I said, the CCP craves power most of all, of course, and maintaining its power, but the legitimacy piece is so critical to it. It knows deep inside that it is not legitimate, okay? And certainly the Chinese people know that it's not legitimate. And so it tries to find that. So whenever, in the most public of ways, people can draw attention to the organ harvesting, the various genocidal behavior against the Uyghurs and other groups, essentially anything that kind of showcases the CCP for what it is in the most prominent possible way. I think that is some of the best, corrective action. That's why it would be so powerful for the Vatican to say, you know what, this deal hasn't really worked out. We're going to cancel it and do it, very loudly. That would be a very powerful and positive thing. And people might be afraid that the Catholics in China might suffer for that. But as we've heard, they're already suffering, and this is how these types of regimes wield their power and coercive abilities to prevent that from happening. Really, the most powerful way, the most powerful thing we can do, is to shine the brightest possible light on this, and because that will help foster that freedom ultimately in China the most. That's my view.
Thank you. And that is the purpose of this campaign, of course, not only in the near term, but we hope over time, irrespective of really how this works out in the run up to this conclave. Trevor Loudon, quickly to you. Your presentation, as I said, was extremely powerful, as always, about the influence operations of the Chinese Communist Party, their United Front Work Department, and so on, and the effect that they have had in neutralizing criticism or opposition elsewhere around the world, including here in the United States. Could you've chronicled intensively in numerous books and films the problem of people inside, for example, the United States Congress, who have been suborned by the Chinese Communist Party and its United Front operations and the like. What would you say to them in particular about the importance of demonstrating that they are not actually old friends of China by being heard about this specific question? There are a lot of them, I think, that are concerned not only about not coming afoul of the Chinese communists, but also, frankly, of not alienating Catholics as well. Do you have a message for them as to why this moment requires, risking, doing both in the interest of both the church itself and human freedom more generally?
Well, I think, it's been fashionable in the West for many years to accept Chinese influence, since Kissinger's time when the Chinese were the line was if we reach out to China, we can make them more like us. If we send our industries to China, we can wean them away from the former Soviet Union. We can make them like us. And people have been making a lot of money with China, and it's been fashionable to turn a blind eye to China's abuses on the false idea that one day they're going to be like us. And if we're just nice to them, they'll be nice to us. Well, I think everybody who has in any way compromised with China in the past, there is forgiveness, there is repentance, but we're on a religious theme here today. But now is the time for choosing. Gordon Chang put out a very simple tweet in the last day or two. Every American today must choose between America and China. If you're a leader of this country, yes, you may have done deals, you may have accepted things from China, you may have been friendly with China, but you can see it's coming to a crunch now. Now is the time to choose. Are you with America or are you with China? Are you with freedom or are you with slavery? And this battle in the Vatican that's going on right now could do with a little bit of moral, a little bit of influence from America, from American politicians. If American politicians start standing against China, it's going to make it a lot easier for the freedom forces in the Vatican to prevail. This is a battle going forward, and I urge every American to make that basic choice. Who do you stand with? Do you stand with America and God, or do you stand with communism and the devil? That's basically the choice we all face right now.
Liz, again, thank you for this incredibly important presentation. Your bottom line, obviously, is that these cardinals must be held accountable. And this window before they all, button up and lock down in their conclave and choose the next pope is the window in which this must be done. We've laid out as part of this campaign, with your extraordinary help, a series of themes that we intend to try to elevate over the next 7 days, 6 days going forward, I guess, from here. Would you speak to the importance of those themes now being made resonant within not just the Catholic community, but those who can also help impress upon these cardinals that, as Trevor has just said, they cannot sit this one out, or worse yet, align themselves with the Chinese Communist Party and still be in the business of serving God Almighty.
As I said earlier, this is the defining moment for the College of Cardinals. This catastrophic deal must be examined, ripped apart, and even if we do not get a favorable pope, we're going to take the long view like the Chinese do, the CCP. This is the long view of digging in our heels, fighting for freedom, justice, transparency, and one never knows where that's going to take us. It may be the moment when the Catholic Church recovers its roots and traditions. Certainly in studying about the Catholic Church in China in the 1950s, when it was flourishing, when the Maryknoll bishops and Chinese priests were just speaking truth to power, unafraid of being imprisoned. And here we are, some 70 years later, now still discussing this heroic battle between the CCP and the Catholic Church. It's absolutely critical that people get up to speed on this, because the Vatican has been successful in keeping the lid on this. And so I think it's essential that we quickly get educated. That's why, share this video, this webinar widely, get engaged. last Pope was very fond of talking about synodality and dialogue and the involvement of the laity. Well, laity, now's the time to speak truth to power to your cardinals, to your bishops, and be unrelenting as that magnificent elderly warrior for the faith, Cardinal Zen, who has never stopped talking about his beloved church and his beloved people in China. That's what we need to do. You know, Frank, quickly, when I was in my, grammar school days, the nuns taught us to pray for the church in China, pray for the starving children in China. And so it was embedded in me that China holds a very special place in my heart and in the heart of the Catholic Church. Now's the time to re-energize that for all of us. And as a result, I think we'll grow closer to the Lord and closer to our church.
Amen. Praise God. Brian, finally to you. J.D. Vance has the distinction, I think, of being the certainly last senior visitor to have met with Pope Francis very, very shortly before his passing. He has made it clear publicly that as a relatively new convert to Catholicism, he is unwilling to engage in what might be construed as internal church politics. You have been very close to, I think, and certainly influential with the new administration, President Trump included. And I would just like you to, if you would, especially given what is widely reported to have been a very direct involvement of Barack Obama in the selection of Pope Francis, and certainly his papacy. Would you urge President Trump to speak, if not about, the future choice of a pope, at least about the importance of the choice that we've now framed very clearly here with the help of this wonderful panel, and as the strong need for that choice to be made properly by the Catholic cardinals and all of us, for that matter.
Yeah, thank you, Frank. My guess is President Trump would be loath to insert himself into the debate over the next pope. What's that famous line in American politics? I can be for you or I can be against you. Just tell me which one you want me to be. When it comes to political endorsements, which one would be most useful? Probably if President Trump endorsed Parolin, who all of us here have described as being a real supporter of Pope Francis's view, especially when it comes to communist China. That would probably be a real negative for Parolin. But I say that really only in jest. Neither Vance nor President Trump are going to insert themselves here in this. And my guess is partly because they just don't think that's going to get them anywhere. The Catholic Church, unfortunately, has become a hotbed of liberalism, progressivism, whether it's been taken over by, some people, Taylor Marshall has called it, whereas we have the deep state in America, you have the deep church with the Vatican. And so you have these forces of globalism that have inserted themselves inside and control the Vatican. In that kind of a mix, a Barack Obama will have influence because they look up to a Barack Obama. They don't look up to a Donald Trump, unfortunately. They want a church today that is really in line with the globalist objectives. I mean, you see a constant theme within the church about open borders, no walls, these kinds of things. There was that rebuke of President Trump at Pope Francis's funeral. And so that is alive and well in the hearts of big parts of this apparatus in the Vatican that is controlling things. Well, I mean, one doesn't want to mix too many themes here, but You look at the church today, and it is not a force for good when it comes to the faithful. Or excuse me, the Vatican does not seem to be a force for good. There is many, many good things going on within the Catholic Church. Anybody who looks at goes to church every Sunday, sees what's being said, sees the faithful around them. And so, in a way, I kind of think of this in populist terms, same way President Trump sees American politics. The everyday American Catholic, the everyday, French Catholic or German or Italian Catholic, they're the force for good. The things that are coming out of the Vatican today are very, very mixed at best. And I think it really is, as Liz said, time for people, and Trevor said this too, people to make a choice here. Where do they want to, who do they want to support? What kind of church are we really going to have here? And I will say on a kind of optimistic note, even if they pick the worst possible person to be the Pope, based on the kind of discussion we had today, the church will survive. Catholics will go on, and they will go on not listening to what the Vatican has to say. And so the moral legitimacy of the Catholic Church does not reside with the Pope. He is meant to be the vicar of Christ, but only the vicar of Christ if he actually is saying and doing the things that conform with the beliefs of the church. There are many today who think that Pope Francis was in a state of heresy for many of the beliefs that he had. I don't know enough to know, these things on a technical level, but just at a high level, the idea that Pope Francis would have allowed in China a deal to be made that precluded children from receiving religious education, that seems to me a form of heresy right there. And so, we can only solve for so many problems. This deal that we've been talking about, Frank, and again, thank you for organizing this, because I do think it's a very important conversation. Just getting this deal exposed and getting as many people as possible to see the absolute shame of having done so, and getting as many people as possible rejecting any form of this in the future, is a very high priority. And it's the kind of high priority any commonsensical person would want. And so I think I'd leave it at that, and not try to insert too many more sort of American political views onto all this, because, as I say, I think our freedom is in no way intertwined with what transpires in the Vatican. And it really does matter that Americans think of themselves as free men and women worshiping their God here in America, completely or substantially, with the kind of view that what transpires here and that we can judge with our own common sense matters much more than what might transpire in the Vatican, and with the Pope, especially a Pope who was left wing with Francis, and unfortunately maybe left wing in the future. Although we hope the conclave of cardinals will find someone who is going to be faithful to Catholic principles and Catholic teachings.
Brian, thank you very much. And just to tie that up, the idea is there will be a much greater likelihood of that being the kind of Pope that will lead the church in the next period of time, if they're right on the China issue, and less likely if they're not. My point with President Trump is not to engage him in deciding the Pope, or with one way or another tipping the scale, but rather simply to encourage Americans to understand there's a lot riding on what comes out of this, not least with respect to the further empowering and for that matter, weaponizing of this global instrument, namely the Roman Catholic Church, by the Chinese Communist Party. And were President Trump to simply express himself on this point, even if it's nothing more than a Truth Social post to the effect that revealing and repealing this secret deal with China would be a very important contribution to establishing the future trajectory of this very important institution. Let me just say one other thing, Brian. You alluded to some things that we can infer are inside the deal. I think, for example, the accession to the idea that the children of Catholics are not allowed, or for that matter, anybody else, to go into religious institutions, churches, and the like, is part of the law of China, not necessarily part of the terms of the deal. But again, what is so worrying about this is if there is not a change in direction on the part of the church from the Pope on down, you will find the Chinese Communist Party continuing, as I think Trevor has specifically suggested, tightening the screws more and more and more, and making freedom of religion, among other things, ever less likely to be practiced in China. I just want to say thank you to this incredible team. We've had a very active conversation with many of you watching at the moment. I trust there will be many more who will do so going forward, especially if, as we ask in each of these programs, our audience to help convey the contents of this program via video, which will be available shortly, as Dee will point out momentarily, to everyone you know. And with a special appeal in this case, to urge them to go to repealthedeal.org and engage in the effort to have this come out right. Let me again thank Liz Yore, Benedict Rogers, Didi Laugesen, Jan Jekulek, Trevor Loudon, and Brian Kennedy for exemplary contributions to what I think is, as Brian indicated, one of our most important programs. Thanks too to our friends and colleagues in the Save the Persecuted Christians Coalition, as well as, of course, the members of our Committee on the Present Danger China for their help, and all of those others who are now pulling alongside. And we pray there will be many more in the next 6 days doing so. Stay tuned for more at repealthedeal.org, as well as here at presentdangerchina.org. God bless you all. Back to Didi.
Thank you, Frank. A video of this webinar will be posted to revealthedeal.org and our coalition websites within a day or so of our program's conclusion. Look for it this evening. We're hopeful. Please share this and our other programs with your elected representatives, colleagues, and other networks. For webinar notices, updates, and news, subscribe to presentdangerchina.substack.com and savethepersecutedchristians.substack.com, and follow us on X at CPD China and at Persecuted Save. Join us again next week for another installment of our Committee on the Present Danger China webinar series on the CCP's unrestricted warfare against America and the free world, and how CCP captured elites betray the USA. Thanks for joining us today, and goodbye.